Got a big crowd today so far. How are you guys doing?
I'm doing good.
Hey, Lean. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's Friday.
Yeah.
Not that that ever means anything anymore, I know, but yeah.
No, really.
I do try to give – go ahead.
I'm finishing my DBQ today, so.
Cool. Guess what we're going to talk about?
DBQ?
Hey, how'd you know?
I don't know.
Yeah, I was up like last night till 11:30 sending out messages to a lot of your classmates, because some people haven't given me any DBQs at all. And I'm like, getting a little worried about you because I'm like, I have not gotten any DBQs from you. So I
Yeah.
no idea if you can do this or not. And I haven't been able to give you any feedback. So I'm like, please just, even if you're swamped and busy, I'm like, stop doing the reviews. Try and give me one DBQ, one full DBQ so I can see, your strengths and your weaknesses and just give you some feedback. So,
Yeah.
but I know it's just, it's in a week, we have one week left. And, I'm like, I don't know. I always get this way as an AP teacher, we get to a certain point where I'm like, I have done everything I can do. Like I've tried to give them everything and tried to review and try to teach them this. And at some point, it always just comes down to how much effort each individual student puts in, and they get out of it what they will get out of it. So, but I don't know. Last night I was like, come on, man, you guys have worked so hard. You've worked so hard. I know this is terrible and a daunting task, but I'm like, don't give up, just keep going and try and contact me. Let me know what's going on. So, but anyway, what's up, guys?
Hey, Mr. MB.
How you doing?
Good, how are you?
Good. All right. Tired of writing DBQs. I'll tell you that, man. Actually, I did not write DBQs this morning. Well, I and we're gonna look at these today. The two Gilded Age DBQs that we're due this week. You guys have done them yet. A few people have turned them in, but I just went over them this morning and just kind of made a rough outline of the docs and stuff. And so we might talk about those, and we can look at the other, I think, two DBQs on like technology and change and continuity, and I forget what the other one was. So. Again, it's hard to believe it's a week. We got one more week before that test, and
I was saying the same thing.
I know. So it's 1 o'clock. So at this point, is it 2 or is it noon? I forget. It's at noon.
I think it's 2.
Is it? I don't know. It's on the calendar, so I always forget. I was trying to think either you'd be done by now or you'd be getting ready to knock it out at this point. So.
That's terrifying.
Yeah, it's terrifying and relieving at the same time, I think.
Oh, yeah.
Again, I keep saying I appreciate you guys showing up. It's like the same few students show up, on a regular basis. And, often you're the same students that are turning in DBQs and stuff and reading my feedback and responding and things. So I really appreciate that,
Are we going to get 5s, Mr. MB?
That would be awesome.
Yeah.
I hope so, because you guys work so hard and you're trying, and I wish everybody could get 5s, but I know that's not going to happen. So
If we get a 5, we can drive your motorcycle, right? That's what you said.
did I say that? If everybody in the class gets a 5?
Nah, that's a joke.
I'm kidding.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll see if anybody else joins. I know last Friday I just canceled the Zoom because I was exhausted. I had way too much work to do, and I still have way too much work to do today. But I was like, we're getting too close to that test to not continue to do this. So we'll see if anybody else joins us. But you know what? we'll time wisely and between the 5 of us and work through some DBQs. So I'll go ahead and start sharing my screen, and I uploaded some more DBQ outlines, and I put it in the how to write a DBQ folder. So in their Google Docs this time. So, you know, I figured we could all kind of work together. And if we want to look at those other DBQs that I did not address this morning, we can work together on those. If you haven't written them yet, again, you know, feel free to, you know, chime in and work our way through it to help you write that DBQ. So this is just kind of like a help session. So again, if you want to find that that Google Doc, if you go to, you know, our distance learning folder, and where everything is, the review folder, and then how to write a DBQ. And I actually added something. It's funny because I've been like collecting materials for the past, I don't know, 2 months, and I forget what I collect. And I saw it today a little bit ago. I'm like, oh my gosh, I need to share that with them. So just to show you, somebody made this outline, and I thought it was really good. I think it's the same teacher that shared I always call it the triage method of writing the DBQ. It's like, okay, just try and get these points first. Now, if you have more time, get these points and then move on to these points. But if you look at this outline, and this might be very helpful to use on testing day. This is what she did. And again, she modified it for this particular exam. But, you know, if you have this in front of you, this might be helpful that day, you know, on Friday when you take it. Of course, I'm thinking, you know, it's a Google Doc. Again, we have to be careful. I mean, you have to like download this so it's not shareable. I think it's okay if you make a copy and you have it, then it's fine. I don't know. Everyone's talking about the security issues with Google Docs. I'm like, they're like, just don't get on the internet. You know, get on the internet, and everything else you do, don't do on the internet. So don't get on a Google Doc like this that's already shared with everybody, because if everyone's working on it together, then you're collaborating. And if somehow they can see that, that's not good. So anyway, this is a really cool outline because it gives you, you know, a little, you know, direction over here as to what you're supposed to be doing. But there's your contextualization and your thesis. And then for your supporting paragraphs, again, I don't think, you know, it's always good to have a topic sentence, you know, at first. But that's, you know, you naturally kind of do that anyway when you're writing that particular paragraph about something in your thesis. So. And, you know, your outside information, there's a good place to put it. You know, you could either do it first or, I mean, anywhere in that paragraph is fine. But especially once you start to analyze your docs a little bit, if there's something else that is relatable to that document, then that's where you would put that. So, and the HIP analysis, again, I still see a lot of people, and not necessarily, I don't think you guys, but a lot of people are writing good, you know, essays, and they're using their documents well, but they're not analyzing any of them. You know, I'm like, okay, don't forget, you know, 2 points on this exam this year is for analysis of 2 different docs. Again, if you can't analyze 2, just do 1 and see if you can't get that done. But, you know, just to talk about, you know, the historical perspective of this, the point of view, you know, and it always seems like the more I look at these, there's at least 2 documents, I would say, that are usually fairly easy to analyze. And I think they do that on purpose. You know, you might see some documents from authors that we never heard of before. I'm like, I don't know who that person is, right? But then, you know, there's going to be, like on the Gilded Age docs, there is one from Carnegie, and it's The Gospel of Wealth. I'm like, oh, great. I mean, you know, if that was on there, that's easy to analyze because you guys know who he is. You know his point of view. You know his audience and the historical perspective of what he's saying. I'm like, that would be definitely a document that I would analyze. And I think there was one from Samuel Gompers. And if you remember, I don't know if you remember, he is the leader of the AFL, the American Federation of Labor, and so again, you would know his point of view, his audience. So typically it seems like they do cut you some slack, I think, and give you, 2 documents that you would probably know the author and be able to analyze. So I would do those. Again, if it's a map or it's a chart, I'm like, you really can't get a lot out of that. You can get some historical perspective, but beyond that, it is hard to tell, who the author is and the audience and the purpose necessarily. So again, I thought this was good to share, and it's pretty short for the most part, but this is, how she lays it out. And again, the historical complexity, this can go anywhere. This is your X, although X, Y, because AB, this is your X. This is, well, even though, all these things were major changes, this didn't change. This actually stayed the same. Or, all of these were causes, but this is actually an effect. All of these things are similar, but this is different. All of these were positive, but this was actually negative, So as long as you show something else, with and again, it says use evidence to corroborate, qualify, modify, blah, blah, blah. I'm never sure about that. If the evidence has to be in a document or if the evidence can be outside information. I'm assuming kind of it's a document, because usually there's always, we've seen typically there's a document, 1 or 2 that are not the same. They're a little bit opposite, And so if you can, I would use a document for your complexity point there. But if not, you can always use outside information as well to do that. So, and then your conclusion, again, if you don't get to this, it's fine. You don't even get a point for it. So I wouldn't even, if you're running out of time, don't worry about, in summary, don't worry about that. I would just skip the conclusion. Again, there are no points there. I think the only benefit really of the conclusion is that if for some reason the reader and grader is confused maybe about your thesis or what you were doing up here, sometimes when I've read the conclusion, that actually clarifies the thesis. I'm like, oh, okay, now I see what you were trying to say, because I didn't really understand. The thesis was a little confusing, but when I came down to the conclusion, I'm like, I understood, pretty much what they were doing. So if you can get to it, great. If you can't, again, there are no points for it. So I'm like, well, why even bother with the conclusion? I wouldn't even do that. Just stick with, doing what you can. Okay. So again, you don't have to use this. And again, it's a Google Doc. You could use this as your quick outline if you want to. But honestly, when I look at these documents and stuff and look at the DBQ, I feel like I already have a system for me. And I'll show you. So if we go back to how to write a DBQ, this. If you want to, again, if you guys want to click on this and work with me and work with each other, if you haven't written the DBQ yet for this, and if you have, you can just follow along. But if you want to click on that, you should be able to type on this Google Doc. Okay. All right. It always gets tricky here. So I don't know if if you guys have looked at it. Again, I can't remember who's turned them in so far. Has anybody done these yet?
I just finished it before the meeting started. This one.
Okay. Did you do the first Gilded Age one or the second one?
I did the first one.
Okay. Jackson, how about you? Have you tried it yet?
No, I'm planning on doing it this evening.
Okay, that's fine. Leanne, you said
Yeah.
kind of working on it?
I'm almost done with it. I did like half of it, so I'm pretty sure I'm going to finish it after this meeting.
That's fine. Did you do one of the Gilded Age ones?
Yeah.
Okay. How about you, Freddie?
I haven't started doing the DBQs for this week yet. I've kind of looked over a few of them, but not really like gone much into detail yet.
Okay, that's fine. So again, this might be beneficial, for those of you guys that haven't quite done it yet, or if you've done it, you can always go back and modify it if you want to, but you guys are probably fine. You don't need to. So the two Gilded Age DBQs are different only because the first one talks about the political and economic impacts of the Gilded Age in big business. And then the DBQ number 2 talks about the societal or the social impacts. And I thought both of them are pretty reasonable. And I figured most people would kind of pick this because I think the Gilded Age is not all that confusing. And we are familiar with the captains of industry and robber barons and the dawning of the progressive era and even the populist movements and the social reforms that came out of this too. So this it's not terrible. It is helpful, I will say, to go back and I had to look some things up today because, again, your head is just so full of information. Like I remembered Hull House. I'm like, oh yeah, this is like Hull House. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what was the lady's name? And I'm like, her name was Anne something. And I looked it up. I'm like, it was Jane Addams. I'm like, okay, I wasn't close. But I mean, maybe it was the Addams I was thinking of. So, but I'm like, well, still, if I could mention Hull House, that would be great. If I can't remember Jane Addams, that's not the most important thing, but Hull House, I guess, and what they did was important. So, and then I'm trying to think, there was something else I was looking up because I just couldn't remember what it was. It was Taylorism. I remembered Fordism, I remember this is, Henry Ford and the fact that he was trying to make products affordable for his workers, and so, and it's with the assembly line and it's all that kind of wrapped together. And Taylorism is the assembly line. It is, so there's one document, I think in several of these DBQs where the guy is, he's very critical of this assembly line work where people are just like robots almost, and they lose their identity and their individualism, and they lose their pride in their craftsmanship in their work because they just do one menial task. And I'm like, well, that's Taylorism. I just couldn't remember the name of Taylorism. Again, if you get to, a point like that and you're like, oh my God, what's that word? It's okay if you can't remember the term, but you can talk about, talk around it. I mean, I know often with the AP Gov test, the kids are like, I can't remember the name of the court case. I'm like, you know what? That doesn't matter. They don't care about the name because the name's not important. Taylorism isn't important. What he was talking about and what he stood for is important. So don't get, don't beat yourself up sometimes if you're just stuck. You're like, oh my God, I can't remember this. You may have time. I mean, actually for something like that, I just kind of quickly went and looked, I kind of knew where to look to find, it took me actually a little bit to find Taylorism. But be careful. I mean, if you're looking for information, watch the time. Don't spend too much time doing that because it may eat too much into your time. So again, let me pull up the documents. And let me just do this. Let me go back to school. Give me 1 second. I'll go ahead and pull up the documents so we can look at them. And again, I know some of you guys have already done this, so you're somewhat familiar with the docs. And again, I'm always happy to see, well, again, these were created by a teacher, but I'm happy to see some familiar images and things. I'm like, oh, we've already seen that. We know what that is. So hopefully you may see things that are familiar too. So let me real quick get to the Gilded Age and look at our DBQs. And we'll look at the first one. So again, we've already seen the prompt, and it's, we're looking at political and economic impacts of big business, right? And so, I mean, looking at this statement, well, again, maybe that's a little early, but we should look at our docs first. But I was thinking, it doesn't say change, so I mean, would you do, change in continuity over time here? Would you do cause and effects, would you do similarities and differences? I don't know why, but for me, I always typically just go right to change and continuity if I can't, or in here I did it because it says evaluate the extent that they impacted this. I did positive impacts and negative impacts, because that's what it looked like was in the documents. And so again, as long as you show two different things, I think that's still fine. You can't just say, everything was great or everything was bad, because they're usually documents to show a little bit of both. So we talked about this. I don't know if you remember the Sherman Antitrust Act. Obviously a trust is like a monopoly. And so this is the government trying to restrain monopolies and outlaw them. You know what? I've never actually kind of read this, and I was shocked, I have to admit, that when I looked at the penalty, it says a misdemeanor. And I'm like, what? That's it? It's like a slap on the wrist. Like, oh yeah, we've had a monopoly. We've made millions and millions of dollars and destroyed our competition. Well, that's going to be a fine then, that's a misdemeanor. I'm like, that's nothing, man. That should be a felony, I mean, this is, terrible abuse of the market. It's a misdemeanor. I'm like, okay, well, and maybe that is the influence of big business, even with this particular piece of legislation where they're trying to bust up the monopolies. At the same time, they're like, okay, we're going to do this, but the penalty's not that bad, so don't worry about it, So the big business still kind of wins out on that legislation. So maybe, imprisonment by 1 year, but I'm sure no one got in prison for this. So again, this is interesting because this is the one that I saw this in another DBQ too. They use this particular piece of information. Let me see if I can get it. There you go. So this one is an engineer and an economist in 1889. And I'm like, okay, is he going to be critical of this, or is he going to be praising it? And the more I read it, I'm like, okay, this seems very critical of what's going on in manufacturing. And again, I kind of mentioned this, where he says it's like the military. He's like, factory work and manufacturing is now like the military. And so, you follow your orders no matter what. You do what your superior tells you. You're pretty individualized in your particular task. And that's it. You have no autonomy really, And so that's happening in the workforce right now. And we've gone from this cottage industry or the homespun industry where, people took pride in what they did at home when they made things from start to finish. And now that is gone. And I thought what's interesting, because he says that all this stuff is gone. And that's this, it was formerly a special characteristic of American workmen. And that element of skill that comes from long and varied practice and reflection and responsibility. I mean, this is like our American identity that we talked about, like hard work, work hard and do a good job. And this person's even arguing that being a craftsman and taking, pride in your work is part of being an American too. And all that is being lost now with manufacturing and assembly line work. The next document, again, we've seen this. I think. I mean, did I show this to you? I know it was in Susan's PowerPoint, but this is a very famous cartoon from Puck. And what's interesting is I've seen this cartoon several times. I'm familiar with it, but I noticed something today that I'd never noticed before. I noticed right here where it says entrance for monopolists. Well, so these are called the fat cats. The fat cats of industry. These big guys that are controlling, these are the bosses of the Senate and control of the senators here. I never saw this back here. I guess the pictures I've seen have never been clear enough, but it says people's entrance closed. I'm like, oh my gosh, I totally never saw that. That's extremely important, where if this is the Senate, and this represents the people have no representation. They have no say. They don't have any place in this room for influence. The only influence is coming from these captains of industry and industrialists. And they are the bosses of the Senate. People's Party platform. So, and it's Omaha too, actually. I'm like, we actually talked very specifically about this. Does anybody know what movement this is part of?
I said something about the Populist Party and socialism.
Very good. Yep. So this is the dawning of the populist movement. And I know it's still kind of confusing because remember, it starts with the Grange. The Grange movement is the farmers. They're the first ones to start saying, hey, man, the railroads and industrialists, they get everything. We're being screwed by the railroads, and, we need help with our crops. We need, rates that are fair on the railroads. we would like, the government to have storage for our crops to hold them until we get the better price in the market. And so it starts kind of with the farmers and the Grange, then it moves further into the populist movement and the People's Party platform, where again, it's kind of taking the power back from the wealthy industrialists that control the nation and bring it back to the workers. And so do you remember who is the most famous populist that we know that ran in 1900 or 1898 actually, and he gave a Cross of Gold speech?
Ryan.
Very good. Yeah, it's William Jennings Bryan. So he's, at this point, so for outside information, that's somebody I would mention maybe if you're on that track and go, this is 1892. A little bit later, this movement will rise in popularity, and actually you'll have presidential candidates. None will be successful. None of them will ever be president. But this is just kind of the beginning of that. And then lastly, I thought this document was very interesting. So, but I thought maybe it was confusing. I don't know. I'm like, I don't know if students would really understand the purpose of this or what this reflects, but how did you guys see this when you were looking at it?
I was very confused, but I kind of, let me get my shit. That's doc 5. Yeah, I just left that out. I didn't know what to do with it.
Yeah, I had a feeling because when I looked at it, I'm like, I'm familiar with it only because even when I grew up, as a child, these things still existed for the most part. It is, it's a catalog. It's the Sears and Roebuck catalog, and you could order anything pretty much you wanted to. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with Lake Shawnee here in Powhatan around the lake. There's lots of little houses. Well, there are kit houses on Lake Shawnee that were ordered from the Sears and Roebuck catalog. You could order a house. They would send you all the pieces. I guess it was like a giant Lego set, and you could reconstruct the house, but you could purchase it from Sears and Roebuck. And so I think their motto and slogan was like, anything that you can imagine, we could sell it to you, And so to me, this is, now it's interesting because this is consumer's guide. And notice it says this book tells just what your storekeeper at home pays for everything he buys and will prevent him from overcharging you on anything you buy from him. Well, to me, that's a marketing ploy. They're like, well, yeah, but they're also saying you can buy it directly from us and you can skip buying it from him because he's going to overcharge you. Just get it from us and we'll ship it to you. So knowing that, Sears and Roebuck, this is a catalog, and this is the beginning of, consumerism on this part, because you can see all these goods coming out of the cornucopia or whatever that she has, all these things from city to factories to farm, they're providing this to everybody. How does this reflect on the Gilded Age? Is this a positive or a negative?
I say a positive. More stuff available.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Kinda
more
like shows.
international trade.
Mm-hmm.
So it lets consumers be able to buy things and help out other businesses. And
So, yep. So now that with mass production, even though it's bad for the worker, it does seem to be bad for the worker. However, there are more jobs, and they're getting a decent wage. It's good for the consumer because for the first time, and you even see it in Carnegie's Gospel of Wealth in the other DBQ, the Gilded Age DBQ. He's like, even poor people have more stuff than rich people had at some point, which is kind of true. I mean, you have access to all these consumer goods at an affordable price. This is a benefit. I mean, this is one of the best things that came out of the Industrial Revolution, is that more people had access to more stuff cheaper, And so this, to me, 'cause we see there's a lot of negative documents here. This is a positive, this is something good. And so I'm like, well, I think that's what they're getting at, that, there are definitely some negative political and economic effects of the big business, but here's something actually that's good from big business, that they do provide lots of cheap consumer goods for Americans, no matter where they live. At this point, Sears and Roebuck is going to supply them with that, And so, but again, without knowing that background, I'm like, most kids would look at this and go, I'm not sure where this fits. And not, maybe this, is a clue right here where it says, this will tell you just how much you got to, you can pay for stuff. And your local guy is going to charge you more for it, So at this point, this is Walmart, maybe. So, because you can kind of almost get just about anything at Walmart, and it's very affordable too. So I'm going to go back to let me close that out. To how I saw these documents. Okay, close that. Go to that. Okay, so again, I mean, honestly, this is how I try. If I was going to write the DBQ on Friday, I would do it the same way. I would write my prompt real quick so I could see it, and then I just outlined the docs real quick. I just wrote Doc 1. Okay, what is this about? I wrote, it says the Sherman Antitrust Act. It's a law. It's written by Congress. It's supposed to outlaw monopolies. Of course, there again, I'm like, it's only a misdemeanor. I'm like, yeah, that's not very, much of a punishment. And it's an attempt to rein in big business. The bold here, I added later. I mean, this is me trying to organize my docs, so I only came back and did that later. For Doc 2, again, I wrote what we talked about. I'm like, it's an article written by an engineer and an economist about the working conditions. He compares it to the military, how it's a negative thing, and it's kind of against American values and stuff. But notice again, I wrote, it sounds like a transcendentalist, that might be something that I want to add as my outside information, that the transcendentalists were very anti-materialistic, and they were also very individualistic. And so they would also probably, see the factory worker as somebody losing their identity and losing their individualism. So, and then there it is. I wrote Fordism, and then I told you I had to look up Taylorism because I just couldn't remember that term. But this is what he's talking about. Remember, Taylor came up with this idea, almost a scientific method to get the most production out of a worker and to get them to do menial tasks. You don't have to be skilled. You don't have to send them to school to that. Just teach them to do that one thing, and you put them all together, and you can mass produce goods cheaply. So again, that cartoon, Bosses of the Senate, again, for the first time, I actually noticed, I'm like, oh my gosh, the entrance for the people is closed. So big business has all of the influence, it seems like, and people have none. People elect those senators. But even at this time, again, this is kind of critical too. This is good outside information. You probably don't remember this, and you'll talk about it again next year in government. Until the 17th Amendment was ratified in the Constitution, we didn't get to pick our senators. State legislators pick their senators. And this is the time where this begins to change, because when we talk about like Boss Tweed and the political machines, right, and the party bosses, if the political machine, in your state was corrupt, if the Democrats or Republicans were the corrupted party and they controlled everything, they're the ones that got to pick the senators. They would just, tell their lawmakers in the states, hey, these are our two guys, send them to DC. And they would be just as corrupt, and that corruption would continue. That's why this changes, because the progressives demand that the people take the power of democracy in their government back. And one of those ways was to allow direct election of senators, allow the people to choose those two senators. And again, I always joke, I'm like, so instead of the party bosses picking the corrupt senators, they let the people pick the corrupt senators, whether they're corrupt or not, I don't know. But that was the idea. And so if you can remember that, and again, I think very few kids can, but that would be fantastic outside information, because you can say, well, this is actually going to change. The progressives are going to demand that this change, and then the 17th Amendment will be ratified in the Constitution and allow the people to pick the senators. And hopefully that would have less influence. But again, no matter what, we pick them, they go to the Senate. Who's really, there telling them what to do? It is big business. And a lot of people feel that way today, that still business and industry has much more influence than us as the people. So again, Doc 4, the party platform, I just put, like I put Williams and Bryan, the beginning of populism. This is people demanding the government help them and not the big business. It's anti big business. And then lastly, again, I know this was difficult, but I wrote, Sears Roebuck catalog, the fact that consumers can buy things in the catalog. This is an advantage of the Gilded Age and industrialization, and that consumer goods are cheaper and readily available for the people. So after that, before I make this thesis, I'm like, okay, so do any of these things have things in common? Are there anything same and similar or different, And so I'm like, DBQ, it's a puzzle, it's a mystery, and you've got these 5 to 7 pieces and you look at them and you're like, okay, how do they fit? Typically I'm looking for pieces that fit and then some pieces that don't fit, And again, that's to focus on that synthesis element, that showing you're going a little bit further and showing something different, If you can't do that, that is fine. The synthesis point is just a point. If to you, you're confused and you don't get all the docs, but 3 of them, or 4 of them seem similar, just use those in your argument and in your thesis and just do that. You can still probably get, 5, 6, maybe even 7 points by doing that and analyzing your docs, but you simply just can't get that analysis point the synthesis point where you're, actually, I forget what they call it. It's called synthesis, but, going further with the documents and the arguments. So if you can't do that, don't, that's the point of saying, although X, Y is trying to work that into your thesis. So that you can do that and work it into your DBQ. But if you can't see an although, you're like, I don't really see an although, that's okay. Just argue one side of the argument that, that most of the time things are negatively impacted by big business, and then just use your docs and justify that and then analyze those, and you can still get plenty of points doing that. So again, I just saw negative and positive impacts. And so all I did was, but I noticed, I'm like, well, some of these things will lead to positive change, and you can work that in there too with your outside information. And so once I figured I would do positive and negatives, my thesis was, although there are many positive impacts on big business from the 1870 to 1900, like the affordability and availability of consumer goods, there are many more negative political and economic impacts because of the political power of big business and the impact on the individual American worker. Now, again, I did not write my DBQ, but with that, I'm like, I have enough where I can work all those documents, I think, into those paragraphs and then add my outside information and some HIP analysis there too. For contextualization, again, I just wrote down everything I could think of that has to do with this at the time, and so mentioning any of this, I do see people still struggling with contextualization where they're super vague and they write 1 or 2 sentences, they're like, the Industrial Revolution was a time of, people working and having jobs and goods are being produced, but, there was things that were bad about it. And that's it. I'm like, well, that's probably not going to get you that point, because that's just, you need some specific things in there too. And the more I was talking to my daughter actually about this earlier today, because she's already taken her, AP exams when she was in high school, and she did her APUSH exam too. And I was telling her, that I came to the conclusion that for the most part, you should always do that last. Do your contextualization last almost. Only because, like I said, you don't want to rob yourself of your outside information, because you can't double dip, and I've said this a lot, I know, and you guys may be tired of me saying that, but, if you put, let's see, Williams, Jennings, Bryan, or something like that, or you put, the 17th Amendment or anything like that in your contextualization, you can't use that in your supporting paragraphs and be counted for your outside information, because you've already used it in your contextualization. So I'm like, save your good stuff. Save that good stuff that save that for your, in your supporting paragraphs. Put that in there. And so then when you go back, you can even, talk around, I think, some of the documents in your contextualization. And I think you might have a better idea of contextualization after you write most of the DBQ. Your head's in the right place for that. So always save that for last. And again, and if you don't get to it, you don't get to it. Just make sure you get that thesis, and get your documents and some supporting paragraphs to get your argument. Again, it's 1 point, contextualization is 1 point. So if you can't get it and you don't get to it, don't worry about it, Any questions about this one? How about you guys, Davis and Jackson? I don't know if you guys both did this one. Your thoughts on how you wrote this?
Well, I went a little bit of a different route, and I'll just read my thesis. My thesis was in the period. I didn't do it all though because I couldn't really get it. But in the period 1870 to 1900, big business impacted American politics and economics by leading to a greater government involvement in the economy, the development of radical ideas, and a decreased need for skilled workers, which caused a degrading of individualism.
Excellent. Yeah, that's great. And again, and honestly, you don't have to have that, although in that thesis, to still get that point. If you, at the end of your, DBQ, in that last paragraph, you go, now, even though all of this was happening, this also was happening, and it's different, or it's opposite, or it's bad, something. If you can still work that in without, it doesn't have to be in your thesis. But the point of trying to get you guys to say in your thesis, although X, Y, because of this, it's putting you in that mindset that you're showing the grader, you're going to show two sides of this argument. So look for that unicorn point, because it's in there. I'm showing you that I'm going to try and do that. So, but like I said, it's 1 point, right? So, if you get everything else, you get 9 out of 10 points. That's still 5, so you got it. That's great, so don't, again, like I said, I'm afraid kids might freak out and go, oh my God, I don't know what the although is. I'm like, it's okay. You don't have to necessarily just get a good thesis and write that essay. If you can work it in. But, again, to try and do this in 40 minutes, I still think it's impossible almost, but, and again, I hope they take that into account when they grade these things, and I think they will. But, yeah, I mean, if you can't get that although, then don't worry about it. Just write what you know and write what you can. Don't let that stick you and throw you off. So, Jackson, did you write this one too, or?
I haven't written anything yet.
Okay, all right. And Freddie, you hadn't, and Leanne, you were working on this one?
I was working on the other one.
Okay, on the second one?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I did too. So this one, and again, they seem fairly similar. And again, I always highlight in my prompt exactly what they're looking for, and again, I can never say it enough to go back and look at your thesis. Does your thesis answer the prompt? Is it really doing this? The nice thing is it says changed, so we know when we see change, we can assume that you can easily do a change in continuity over time for this. But I was just, I'm like, some of the thoughts I had before I started looking at things, like, well, what changed and what stayed the same? These impacts on society, the impacts on changing the American society. Were some changes positive or negative? Were some changes greater than others? Like, although this was a change, it wasn't nearly as great as these changes, that is still evaluating the extent of the impacts. So anything like that, that is again, if you can get to that point, you are going for that extra point, But again, if you can't, you can say, just these things changed, and that's it. You don't have to mention something that stayed the same, Again, I was just on this negative positive kick here. I will tell you, though, that this one took me a while, though. I looked at the docs, and I'm like, these docs are all over the place. I'm not really sure. I really had to spend a little bit more time on these docs to figure out how I wanted to organize them and craft a thesis. So this took me a while to do this. So the first one is, well, let's go look at those docs. Okay. So first doc, again, so Henry George. Did we ever talk about that guy? I don't know. I don't think so. I don't know. Like Henry George, the man with 2 first names. I don't know. Don't know who this guy is. So to me, that's not helpful. And I think even when I was writing this, like my summary of this doc, I'm like, who is this guy? I don't know. I don't know who this guy is. It tells me nothing. It doesn't tell me whether he's an economist or a political philosopher. I don't know anything about this guy. I don't know where he wrote this. He just wrote something called Social Problems in 1883. I would not analyze this document because I'm like, I don't know enough about this one or this guy that I just, maybe I can, after I read, I can get a point of view in an audience, but to me, this one's a little mysterious. So I'm like, I am not going to analyze this particular document. So, but he says, we cannot safely leave politics to politicians or political economy to college professors. The people themselves must think, because the people alone can act. And then he says, look, I'm not saying bad things about rich people, and I'm not speaking to these things to excite envy or hatred and to, get people to rise up. But if we need to get a clear understanding of these social problems that we're having, we have to recognize the fact that it's due to monopolies, which we permit and create, to advantages which we give one man over another, to methods of extortion sanctioned by law and by public opinion, that some men are enabled to get so enormously rich while others remain so miserably poor, right? So it sounds like he's saying, well, a lot of our social problems are because the government's not doing enough to stop these monopolies, right? They create them, they allow them to happen, and, businesses create them and we permit them to. And it seems like the government often gives advantages to some people over another. That sounds like that fat cat cartoon that we had seen earlier. And then, that some men are unable to get so enormously rich while others remain so miserably poor. What was it called when that was a belief, almost like the scientific theory and belief that, well, that's just the way it is. In nature, some men are born to be poor, some men are born to be rich, and they work hard, and that's just the way it is. What do we call that?
Social Darwinism.
Very good. So would you mention social Darwinism here? Probably, yeah. Throw that word out and go, well, this definitely reflects the idea, he's criticizing the idea of social Darwinism, that, rich people are like, well, that's just the way it is. I mean, we were born to be rich and you were born to be poor, and we can't really do much about that, right? Which is interesting, because to me, even that thought seems to go against the idea of capitalism in America, that, it's the self-made man. Carnegie wasn't born rich, but he was born, I guess, with gifts and abilities, and maybe that's it, that he was born with certain gifts and abilities to make him wealthy and powerful, and others are not. So, speaking of, well, there he is, Carnegie, wealth. And we talked about the gospel of wealth. So, again, I'm like, this is a great document to analyze. Carnegie, his background. It is, it's that Horatio Alger story of rags to riches. He came here with nothing in his pocket, and he rose to be one of the richest men in the world, and definitely in America. And we know he did that through hard work, but he also did it through, corruption and lucrative practices, But then, did he feel guilty once he made all this money? Kind of, right? So do you see even without reading this, do you remember what he said in the Gospel of Wealth?
The rich needs to give money to the poor.
Well, should you directly give like money and payments to poor people? No. Why not? Don't they need that to help themselves out?
They'll use it for like not the right stuff, something like that. Well,
and it's short term, right? I can give you money today. Oh, that's what the government just, gave us $1,200, right? And I understand, that is, a stimulus right now to jumpstart the economy, because this is, this is not a permanent situation that we're in. This is a temporary fix to kind of get us through. And they may need to do it again. We'll see. But that is not the way to help people in long term, And I always think, if you give a man a fish, you feed him for a day. If you teach a man to fish, then he never goes to work, because he always wants to go fishing and, be in his boat. No, he can fish for himself and provide for himself. And that's the gospel of wealth, that give people skills. So he's like, and I like the fact he says, this is where I mentioned this earlier, the poor enjoy that what even the rich could not before afford, He's like, we live in a world today, this is amazing, that the laborer has more comforts, the farmer has more luxuries. It's these things that we have done as a nation quickly that has made this nation great, However, though, he says, it is also, though, the duty of the man of wealth that, first set an example, right, of modest, unostentatious living, shunning display or extravagance. Don't have 1,000 Bentleys, don't be showing off all the money that you have and have a bunch of houses. After doing so, consider all this surplus money that you have, and, you're just simply a trust of that. You know, you're just holding this money because yes, you did earn it, but you did it through all these other ways. Now it's time to return that, you know, back to the people. And so, cause you're just a trustee of this. And so of the poor brethren, and again, give them education, give them museums and schools and entertainment and things like that, and art to make them better. And so that is the gospel of wealth. So this is, you know, kind of him feeling a little guilty. But it's nice because he starts off saying, you know, this is kind of like the Sears and Roebuck catalog I was mentioning earlier. You know, even though, you know, life for the worker is tough and, you know, things could be better, still the Industrial Revolution raised wages, and it raised the standard of living in America for most people. And they were able to buy cars and radios and refrigerators and things like that. And more than one shirt, you know, or a pair of pants that they could. Consumerism grew rapidly. And so, but there's, you know, there's a negative side, and all these people making money on it need to give back. Again, this one, Adna Farron Weber, never heard of her. Don't know who she is. She writes something about the growth of cities. Now, when I saw that, I'm like, wasn't there another guy, you know, like a progressive muckraker who wrote about the cities? Anybody remember who that was? I know it's hard to remember all these guys, isn't it? So I think it was Jacob Rees. I think it was Jacob Rees wrote that. Again, if you can't remember that, then you can, but I mean, I would say, you know, well, you know, there were muckrakers that wrote about life in the cities. And so when I saw this title, I'm like, oh, she's going to talk about how bad things are in the cities. And then when I read it, I'm like, oh, she's saying the opposite, right? I'm like, I kind of didn't expect this. This is an interesting document. She's like, you know, cities are amazing, you know, because there's so many different people. And again, typically it's true. Even today, cities are liberal and progressive because you have a different mix of people and they're all together. And so they typically tend to be more liberal and progressive. And the rural population is not just merely conservative. Well, again, Powhatan, you know, we're conservative, right? But she says it is full of error and prejudice. That this desire for a higher standard of life for purely material comforts and luxuries brings many people to the city. And there are conveniences in the cities, right, that can't be obtained outside in the country, like in Powhatan, right? Like education, amusements, attractions, recreation, modern conveniences, technologies of life. So she says that cities are the nursery of arts and sciences, the center of industry and commerce, you know. The cities represent the highest achievements of political, intellectual, and industrial life. She's saying cities are the best things in the world, you know, and all those country folk got it wrong, that they are, you know, backwards and they don't have access to all this amazing things that we do in our cities. And again, honestly, I was shocked when I read this because I'm like, oh my gosh, I mean, everything we read about urbanization during this time is like there were slums, there were disease, you know, Hull House was there for the immigrants to help them through this terrible time. The muckrakers took pictures of the, you know, cities and the slums. I mean, this was everything I read about it was, this was awful. And she's like, no, actually the cities were great. They're great at this time. So I was like, well, that's an interesting document, you know. Again, I don't know who she is, but I'm like, her point of view is obviously she's a liberal city dweller. And she believes that, you know, the cities are these beacons of hope and life and technology and education, and people, country folk, are simple and backwards and have it all wrong, you know. So I'm like, that's an interesting document. A chart, again, I wouldn't analyze this. And, you know, this one's actually, I think, kind of tough to read, sort of, because I'm like, well, you know, what does it show? Well, there's an influx of Western European immigrants, especially in the 1880s, but that diminishes. And we see a rise in Southern and Eastern immigrants. So what does this chart tell you? Leanne, were you looking at this chart already, kind of, and trying to figure out what to do with it?
It was like the Irish immigrants, I think, that was going to America because of the potato famine, I think.
Well, the Irish are kind of already here somewhat. Well, in the 1880s, for sure. In the 1870s, the Irish, you know, because if that's what you're talking about, the Western Europeans, yes. But then they begin to diminish. And then we have immigrants coming in from Southern and Eastern Europe. So these are your Slavic countries, you know, your Eastern European countries like Yugoslavia, Czechoslovakia, Poland. You see a rise in those immigrants coming in. But overall, though, why are immigrants coming in? How come so many are coming in? What are they looking for?
Oh, they want like jobs.
Right.
and
So,
freedom, I guess.
yeah. So, I mean, this is a direct result of industrialization. Now, remember, this prompt is about changes in society. So, how does looking at a chart of immigrants, it fluctuates between Western and Southern and Eastern European. I mean, obviously, they bring different cultural influences to cities and stuff. What is their social effect on cities?
Like more diverse.
Okay, so that's one of the reasons why it's liberal, right? So there are positive impacts, make it more diverse. Even today, we talk about ethnic foods. I know on Tuesday, I saw the line of cars on Route 60 in front of El Cerro Azul for Cinco de Mayo, which I thought was a little silly because I'm like, Cinco de Mayo is not even a real holiday. I don't think Mexicans actually even celebrate. That's an American holiday. That's an excuse to buy tacos and drink, I think, But, the cars were lined up down Route 60. And I'm like, well, again, the only reason we have that in Powhatan is because we have Mexican restaurants in Powhatan and we have Chinese restaurants and Italian restaurants. And, it's reflected, the mix of Powhatan is much more diverse now than it ever has been, actually. So, and you see that, and you would see that in ethnic neighborhoods as well. But is there a negative side to this? Now, again, I know if you kind of look, when you add the numbers together, the numbers are dropping here. But if you add these two together, you would, equal probably at least the Western Europeans. As these, and again, you're going to see this is like pushback. Are we going to start to limit immigration? Hopefully you would see that too. But the reason we limit immigration is for several reasons. One, for, again, prejudice, xenophobia is part of that. But when we looked at the prior documents about American identity, if people are concerned about immigrants taking jobs and immigrants also diluting the white population, you're going to see a beginning of a restriction of that. And this changes society in America. I also saw it as, again, this is a burden on cities. Urbanization, Hull House exists to get these immigrants integrated into society and to learn English, and to get a house and be productive and assimilate into America. So, and the last one is Samuel Gompers. Again, I know it's hard to remember all these people. I know Samuel Gompers is the leader of the American Federation of Labor. I know it's a labor union. That is his point of view. And you can see that clearly. He's like, that people are treated like pieces of a machine by these factory owners and as inanimate objects when they're not. They're not property. They're real people, and they should be treated that way, and they should get a decent wage, and they should be protective. And he says, I think this is important. He says specifically, let me move it over a little bit, that the lives and limbs of the wage workers shall be regarded as sacred as those of all others in our fellow human beings. That so if they're injured at the job, because of the factory, they shouldn't just be tossed aside. The factory needs to do something about that, And he's blaming them. He's like, many of the worst abuses of the industrial system now filling our poorhouses and jails. So that all these social problems come from the industrial system and the way they're taking advantage of workers, and they're not doing enough to protect their workers too. So that being said, just real quick, the way I looked at these documents, again, I was still going for positive and negative impacts on society. And so, again, this one I said, it was negative because this guy's complaining about social Darwinism. He's complaining about the government not doing anything about monopoly. So that would be a negative impact on society. Again, I'm like, who is this guy? I don't know who this guy is. So I would not do that one for an analysis. This guy I know, his point of view is obviously a wealthy captain of industry or a robber baron. And I know he wrote The Gospel of Wealth. And I don't know if you remember conspicuous consumption. That's probably something that most of us don't remember. But when I was going back and reviewing a little bit, I'm like, that's the idea of buying mink coats and having a couple big cars and going out drinking and dancing and having fancy food and stuff to show off in a nice mansion. You know, he's denouncing that. He's like, conspicuous consumption is, oh my gosh, look at all this amazing stuff that I can buy that you can't. He's like, don't do that. That's not very helpful. You know, you should live a modest life like everyone else and then give back, and you should do that. Again, I put, yes, social Darwinism is real, but the job of the wealthy is to pay it back to society. So again, he's still a believer in social Darwinism that, yeah, I mean, I was made to do this, and unfortunately you were not. However, because I was made to do this and I made a lot of money, my job is to help you and help you up, you know? So I would think this one would definitely be an easy one to analyze. Again, this one you could analyze too. The lady talking about how amazing cities are and how us country folk are backwards and wrong, you know? You can still analyze that pretty good, you know? And so again, I was having a little trouble like, okay, so the city is a good thing and industrialization is good for the city, you know? Whereas other people are saying it's bad. Immigrants, you know, their impacts on the cities create bad things. And so we have to address that with like Hull House and Jane Addams. But there's good things, you know, like the melting pot, you know, and like you guys said. So honestly, this one, I'm like, I'm not really sure, you know, it took me a while to figure out how to do this. And this was my thesis. And I don't know if it's good or not, but I put, although big business had positive impacts on societies, especially in the cities, like that lady was saying, it also had many negative impacts as immigrants flooded those same cities and industrialists took advantage of workers, creating horrible conditions for the lower classes. And then I would address that with all my documents where they're all critical of big business not doing enough to help the lower classes. And then again, pretty much the same contextualization as that first one because it's the same time period and same topic. So any thoughts on that? Again, sometimes I think this is like dreadfully boring for you guys, maybe to just listen to me talk through this and to look at this. And I'm like, I hope by showing you kind of what I was thinking, it might help you work through this, you know? And I know you guys are very great critical thinkers on your own and you see it differently and you can write something completely different and still do good and better maybe than what I did. I just feel like the more, you know, plus it's review. Oh my gosh. I mean, like every time you guys do a DBQ, you're still reviewing for that period, you know? And so we talk about the people like Fordism and Taylorism and Jane Addams, because I've forgotten her name, and, you know, social Darwinism. All this stuff is good review for the test. And we don't know which period they're going to pick. But the more we just kind of dabble in these DBQs and look at these documents, you may see, you know, these documents on Friday because like we always say, there's only a limited amount of good primary sources that show specific points of view during these time periods. And so the more we can look at these documents too, I'm like, the better it is for you guys. Cause like, oh my gosh, we talked about that document just last week and I know how to analyze that and I know what that's about. So the more exposure I think you have to all of this, the better. So. Any questions or comments? I see, it's like just after 2:00 now. So I've spent an hour talking at you. Anything you guys want to chime in with or add or?
Did you say that they're having like a selection of prompts that they're going to randomly send out during the exam, or is it just one prompt for every person?
I think what I saw was there are multiple prompts, just like there are multiple tests, you know, not everybody sitting in the classroom takes the same test. There are different versions of it. So yeah, I'm assuming that everyone is not going to get the exact same DBQ. I'm assuming that there's going to be 3 or 4 different versions for sure. I don't know how they, you know, disseminate that and how they, you know, choose who gets which one. And it could just simply be random. But I would be shocked if if everybody in the world takes the same DBQ, because that's not normally how they do this. They, you know, they have random tests and there are different versions of the test. So I'm just assuming that there will be different DBQs, and I'm assuming that they would definitely be from different periods as well. So.
Gotcha.
Mm-hmm. Have any of you guys tried the demo yet?
Yeah, I've tried it.
Yeah,
I tried the chemistry one. I mean, I'm assuming it's the same though.
it is. You know, I mean, that's just to make sure you know what you're doing, your system, handle it. So, but I was going to send out a message, I think this weekend for Monday and say, I'm going to put it on the calendar, say, this is one of your assignments. Do the demo. Please do that. Because first, go ahead, Freddie.
I would agree with that. Like, that's a good idea.
Yeah, just because, and I have a sinking feeling, hopefully not, but I have a sinking feeling I have these students that still may not even know the format of the test, that they may not be like, I'm going to do really good on the multiple choice. I'm like, there's no multiple choice. What are you talking about? This is a 45-minute one DBQ question test, man, and there's only 5 docs. Where have you been? I think, there's always kids that just kind of are a little lost, and I'm like, I just want to make sure you guys, Miss Samuels just sent out an email. I just saw it right before I came on here to all the AP teachers for AP Computer Science. She sent something out. Lean, are you in that class? Are you in AP Computer Science?
I'm taking it next year.
I
Yeah.
took it last year.
I think Miss Samuels is a fantastic teacher. I love her so. But she sent out. She's like, this is what I sent all my kids, and I don't know what she like. She found all the kids' emails and logins or something and sent them to them and said, do this. I was like, oh my gosh. I was like, that's a programmer. I'm like, I don't know if I could do that, but I'm going to definitely try and make sure all my students understand, where to go and how to do this. But to do that demo, just to see what it looks like, so there's no surprises. And I know, it's terrible because we keep sending, I feel like all of us, we send you so much information all the time. Things are going to get lost, and I have to remind myself, I'm sitting here on this end at this screen, and I'm like, but I sent you that message last week. You probably got, 10 messages last week from 10 different teachers. And you're like, I didn't see that. So I have to be patient and, pick and choose what's the most important thing for you to see. And I'm trying to not upload too much stuff. I'm like, my how to write a DBQ folder is getting bigger. And I'm like, well, I need to just minimize and take, these are the things you actually really, really, really need. And maybe when we get close to the test, I'll start taking a few things out to say, you don't need to worry about this anymore. Just these are the tools that could help you on that day. And we'll stick to that. I did promise that I would try and get you guys some like 1 or 2 page summaries of the periods. I'm still going to do that. Cause I saw one today for period 6. I have the College Board summary of what you need to know with specific information plugged into. I think you guys maybe have done that for me at some point, but you may not know where it is. So I am going to start pulling together like 1 and 2 page summaries of the periods. So that's helpful. I mean, on test day, if you get a question and you're like, it's period, 4, I'm a little cloudy on something. All I got to do is just pull up, and I forget who that name is. Like, oh, there it is, or what that particular term was. There it is. You would definitely have time for that if I can give you the information all in one spot and succinctly. So, and I will do that too. Any other questions? Okay. Again, I love you guys, man. I appreciate you doing this. I know this is not easy and to give up time and sit here, but I hope that the more we chat or you kind of just listen and soak it all in and practice on your own, that on Friday, next week, you will be darn good and ready to do this, that you will be prepared and you'll be like, okay, there's my prompt. All right, look at my documents and start writing down my stuff. And I'm like, okay, this looks like that. And it looks like that. I remember this. Write down what you know and start typing that thing up and submit that. And I think you'll all be fine. So I'll let you go. I hope you get a little break on the weekends. I was going to say, I kind of, usually by Fridays, I'm exhausted because I'm like, I got to take a break. And students were emailing me and messaging me last weekend. And I'm like, I see you, but I'm not really talking. I'm not doing schoolwork right now. I got to get away from it. So we all need to give ourselves a break. So I know I feel for you because I know you guys are working so hard and I wish you can give yourself a break, but it's coming. It's coming. After Friday, things will be much easier for us. When are your other AP tests? Is this the first test for you guys or not?
This is the second one because AP Chemistry is the day before.
Oh, is it really?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's gonna be.
So fun.
So you guys And so what's on that test? What does that look like?
It's two FRQs.
Okay.
One, I think it was 1 45-minute and 1 25-minute.
Mm-hmm.
And that's it.
Is Miss Thomas freaking out about it, or is she like, you got this, you got
I
this?
mean, it's half and half. She's like over preparing us for it, like
Yeah.
4 FRQs a week, and there's 7-page FRQs.
Woo.
So it takes like 2 hours to do one, but you
Yeah.
know, it's going.
Yeah.
All gonna be worth it.
Yeah, I know. I'm sure, she beats you down, but again, she gets you to where you need to be. So I try not to beat you down so much, I think this is a little bit, well, I don't know. I think this is a little bit, it's obviously different than chemistry. You can think a little bit differently on this test than you can on a chemistry AP test, but
I'm
And
taking the
maybe I
English
should look at this guy. Go ahead, Leanne.
I'm taking the English one, so this class is definitely helping me out with my writing skills.
Really?
the
Well,
AP
because it's,
the AP English one is on the 20th, I think.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
Wednesday of the week after.
yeah, because
And
I've been
that-
on Zoom calls with Miss Robertson and like with students, but we've been discussing like what they have to do. And she's like, oh, well, they do that for me too. I'm like, oh, really? Okay, good. And so it seems like, yeah, we kind of overlap on, and that's the good thing about this test is that you have critical writing skills that you need to be able to do and critical thinking skills. And hopefully it overlaps into those other classes.
I
So,
think the only difference between the two is one, you're analyzing one document, and the other one, and it's one longer document, of course.
right.
And it's a rhetorical analysis, so that's going to be our 1 45-minute for English, while this
Mhm.
one is a 4 DBQ analysis. So the only
Wow.
difference is the rhetorical analysis of one, while the situational analysis of the other 4
Yeah.
documents.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And,
so that's what
like,
we're going off of.
This history helps out with the context for the passage for the English one because
Oh, so you have to do
Okay.
contextualization for that too?
It
Well, not
depends. It
entirely.
depends.
Well, I mean, it's really important to know the time period and like why they're saying this.
It
Because
depends on
that's
the
important
piece.
for the rhetorical.
Yeah.
I mean, it depends if it's historical or not. I mean, if it's historical, then 100% you're going to need a contextualization to rhetorically analyze. But if it's literally just like a fantasy type piece and it's talking about how did they convey their message, you can use background information or you can just use the information on the doc.
Cool. Interesting. And that's the following week, so.
Yeah, it's the following week, so we're good on that.
Cool.
I'm actually really happy about that because I'm really good at rhetorical analysis, but I
Yeah.
suck at
It's one of the
argumentative.
easiest ones.
So like, well, it is, but it isn't, because if you
Well, you
can't,
have like an outline, so you have like a toolkit for you to use.
well, if you aren't analytically wired, man, there's some people that know how to give an argument but can't give the background information, which is the analytical analysis.
Yeah.
So it's all about that, and I'm good at that, so that's good. Because
Like I said, next year in AP Gov, though, there is an argumentative essay. One of the questions now is a argumentative essay, but it's not too bad. I mean, again, but it's like this. I mean, but that's what, DBQs. That's what this is. You are making a historical argument, and in your thesis, and you are backing it up with the evidence that they give you, they provide with you. So, and again, this is not easy to do. And I've said it several times. I'm like, they want you to think and write like a historian in 40 minutes. I'm like, okay, well, that's dumb because, historians go to school for years and years and they take forever to write theses and papers and stuff. And I'm like, and you're like, okay, great. Now, but you can do it in 40 minutes. I'm like, I don't think that's just crazy. So, but anyway. All right. Well, I will let you go. And I appreciate you guys. Again, I just can't say it enough. I appreciate you working hard and showing up and keep doing it. So it'll be over soon enough. So
Bye, Mr. MB.
bye. You guys have a great weekend.
Mhm.
Thanks, Mr. MB.
Bye.
Bye.